favorite class today. Today, boys and girls, we're going to talk about this guy. This guy's name is John Locke. John Locke believed in empiricism versus the guy we talked about last day, Rene Descartes. He was a rationalist. Now, what's the difference between rationalism and empiricism? Well, it's how you formulate your knowledge. Epistemology, how you formulate your knowledge. Let me give you a great example. Let me think of a great example. Rene Descartes was a rationalist. And what that means, in following in Plato's footsteps, you couldn't depend upon what your senses tell you. So if you can't depend on what your senses tell you, you have to sit down, you have to rationalize. Remember the story of Rene Descartes climbing inside of a stove and thinking, or people coming to his house and waking him, not waking him, but finding him still in bed because he just laid in bed all day and just thought. John Locke was on the other side of the spectrum. John Locke says, no, empiricism means that you trust your senses. And the best analogy I can use would be here in Canada. So we're here in Canada. So I'm outdoors in the wintertime and I walk in, I don't have gloves on, so my hands are really cold. So I walk in to warm up my hands. Sometimes people go to the sink and they turn on the sink and they stick their hands under the water. Well, according to Rene Descartes, if you stick your hands under the water, you will find the water to be very warm. But when you turn the taps on, the water's probably room temperature. It's been sitting in the pipes, in your house, so it's going to be room temperature. But it feels warm to you. And because of that, he stresses that you cannot trust your senses. Whereas John Locke and his ideology of empiricism is that the only way to formulate knowledge is through your senses, is sensory reception. So he actually divided your senses, or everything, he actually divided everything, the nouns, everything physical. He divided that up into two qualifications, primary and secondary. Now, to put that in perspective, John Locke would walk in, or say that I would walk in looking at things from Locke's perspective, and I would walk in from outside, my hands are still cold. I walk in from outside, I go over to the taps, I turn the taps on, I stick my hands under the water. Yes, the water feels warm. My senses are slightly incorrect because the water is not warm, the water is room temperature. However, the primaries of the water that my senses are feeling, the primaries are the water's wet. The water's fluid, and as a fluid, it can behold the shape of the vessel that it's put in. He can qualify water. Yes, he agrees that his senses might not be bang on with the temperature of the water, but that's a secondary. So the primaries would be that you use your senses, you gain knowledge from the use of your senses. Okay, that's how you gain knowledge. And he referenced education. He did some work in education, and he referenced education, saying that, or giving the analogy that when a child is born, a child has a blank slate. His mind is a blank tablet, and tabula rasa, I believe was the word he used in one of his works on education. He said a child's mind is a blank slate, and it is the senses that gives knowledge to that child. A person gains the knowledge by using their senses in relation to what you see, what you learn, and experiments, observation and experiments. It is your senses that give you knowledge. Okay, now what else can I tell you about Locke? Okay, politics. He was big in politics. And unfortunately, even though he had some great ideas in philosophy in relation to politics, a lot of his ideas didn't really get put into motion until after he was dead. And it seems like when you study history, a lot of people who had some great ideas, or great whatever, they don't come to fruition until after the person dies. We can reference our own Canadian artist, or Nova Scotian artist. I can't remember her name now. She painted all the funny colors down in the South Shore. Name escapes me. Anyway, she painted all the bright colors, yellows and stuff, and she worked as an artist and scraped by during her entire life. But after she died, all her artwork, it took notice. People took notice of her artwork, and they went out and they paid big sums, and her art is worth a lot of money now. But when she was alive, she was just barely scraping by. I think a lot of the same can be said for John Locke. Even though he was popular during his life, it was after he died that some of his ideologies really got put into focus. Okay, his political theory. John Locke said that, and he wrote a treatise, his book was called The Two Treatises of Governance. His book was Two Treatises of Governance. And in that, he outlined what he believed was good governance. He said that government is an absolute necessity. We need governance. We need governance because anywhere that governance of a people has taken hold, the people have benefited. And sometimes the people have to give up a small amount of their independence in order to fit within the confines of a governance. And the government should look out for the best interests of the people. If the government doesn't look out for the best interests of the people, John Locke said in that book, it is not a right of the people to rebel. It is an absolute obligation that if people are not being governed well, meaning there's no life, there's not a good life, or no liberty, or you lose the rights of private property. One of his focus in governance was life, liberty, and property. He believed that citizens should have access to the three: life, liberty, and property. And if the government tries to take those away, it is your absolute obligation to rebel as a society against the government. Interesting stuff. You will see the Americans. Now, John Locke lived in a very turbulent time in England. He was born in 1634, I believe, 1634, and he died in 1704, I think. So if you look at the time frame where he had all his studying done, and he was voicing his opinion and writing books. If you look at that time frame, it was a very turbulent time in English history. It was a time, I believe, his book on governance, his two treatises on governance, was published the same time that the English Bill of Rights was published. So it was a time of great upheaval in England. So he had his eye on everything that was going on at the time. So he was, he could write from a fortified perspective, I guess. Now, the Americans, I mentioned that after he died, his work really came into fruition. The Americans, the writer of the Bill of Independence, the American Declaration of Independence, was Thomas Jefferson. And he wrote that after John Locke had died, but he used a lot of Locke's ideas. And if you read the American Declaration of Independence, you will see life, liberty, and protection of property is factored into that, and it's definitely factored into the Constitution of the Republic of the United States, that they wrote 100 years later. That was a big thing: life, liberty, and security of the person and property. That was a big component part of the American Constitution, and a lot of that came from the findings of John Locke and his views that church should be separated from the state. Empiricism should be at the forefront of knowledge gain, and the abolishment of absolutism or divine right of kings. What else can I tell you? Religion. Geez, I never even talked about religion. John Locke and religion. So John Locke and religion. John Locke was a firm believer in separation of church and state. So he believed that there should be no religion in relation to governance. governance and religion should be separated. And he had great examples to support that, and we can take great examples from Canadian history. When Canada was first settled by Europeans on a permanent basis would have been the French in Quebec. So you would have had Quebec City, Stadacona, you would have had the Trois-Rivières, and you would have Montreal. And the governance of those places was confined to or supported by three people. The governance was looked after by three people. The intendant, Jean Talon, the intendant, the governor, the intendant, the governor, and of course, the bishop. So the three of those people were responsible for the governance of the colony of Quebec. Now, what that created was all kinds of issues. It was difficult to get things done. There was a massive bureaucracy that formed. And John Locke could see that, as could everybody else. So he was adamant that separation of church and state was paramount in the development of a great civilization, or society, great society. So what else can I tell you? Religion, he was staunchly religious. He supported his religious views, which of course would have been, in England, would have been Protestant. England separated from Catholicism. Europe was predominantly Catholic up until, or Western Europe anyways, predominantly Catholic, up until King Henry VIII wanted separation from his wife, and the Catholic Church refused to give him an annulment to his marriage. So he said, well, yeah, forget you guys, and he separated right away, took England right away from the Catholic Church and formed their own church, the start of the Protestant Reformation, the start of the Protestant Church, the development of the Protestant Church. Now, Protestants and Catholics adhere basically to the same ideology, as did some of the Jewish communities that were in England at the time. Predominantly, England was composed of Christians, Protestants, and a smaller number of Catholics, and there was some Jewish religion there as well. They were represented there, the Jewish faith. Now, if you look at those three religions, you will see that they all have a basis in the Ten Commandments. So they all gravitate towards the structure of a society based upon the Ten Commandments. And Locke was a firm supporter of that, and he believed, because of that, that people should have freedom of religion. Whatever religion you wanted to worship was okay, even if you wanted to worship a religion that's different than Christianity. If you Buddhism or Sikhism, he was a supporter of that. And the rationality he used for that was that if the state tried to mandate a specific religion, it would create more strife than if you just allowed people to practice their religious beliefs. He was, however, not a supporter of atheism. He didn't like the idea that people didn't ascribe to a higher power, that people didn't believe in Yahweh or God or Allah. He wasn't a firm supporter of that. So he believed in religion, organized religion, not atheism. So what else can I tell you? Well, I guess that's pretty much a summation of John Locke. We'll talk more about him in class. I hope that helped you out. Have a good day, everybody.